Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome all of you, both in person and online, to our third webcast. I'm Roberta Jacobson, a member of the class of '61. I'll tell you a little about how these webcasts began, mention some administrative details, and introduce our speakers. A couple of years ago, my classmate Howard Czar had the idea of hosting a webinar in this Kathleen Czar room in the Crerar Library. We wanted to learn about cutting-edge research and new trends in older disciplines, and to hear discussions of contemporary scholarly topics from the great scholars at the University of Chicago. Howard and I worked with university and Crerar staff to present the first webcast on December 12th of 2011, just for members of our class of '61. Dr. Emily Teeter, research associate at the Oriental Institute, gave us some insights into crafts and consumers in ancient Egypt. Al Telser joined us as we worked with Blair Ufer of the Alumni Relations and Development staff to develop more webcasts. In the fall of 2012, classmates from 1959 to '63 heard a fascinating talk from Dr. Matthew Terrell, the director of the new Institute for Molecular Engineering. We are pleased to meet again today in the wonderful Kathleen Czar room and to have the support of Barbara Kern and Andrea Twist-Brooks, co-directors of the Crerar Library. These occasional webcasts are akin to the Uncommon Core sessions that many of us enjoy during reunion weekend. Participants today include Alumni Emeriti from the class of '63 and earlier. So as you can see, each time we've expanded our audience a little bit. We hope learning about the future of books and libraries today provides a few new ideas for you to ponder, and that you enjoy this chance to connect with the university and your fellow alumni. Before leaving today, please fill out the evaluation forms that you got and leave it on the table or with Blair Ufer. If you are online, you will receive the same evaluation form, and your feedback will help us to create better programs in the future. Blair is our moderator today. She'll be collecting questions via email and Twitter. She'll select questions to ask during the Q&A session from those who are online, and from those in the room, we'll use a portable microphone which both Howard and Al will be on the sides to help you ask your questions. Today, we're very pleased to have with us both Judith Nadler, the director of the University of Chicago Library since 2004, and Randall Picker, the James Parker Hall Distinguished Service Professor of Law. They will each speak for about 30 minutes, and then they'll do a joint Q&A session. You are welcome to pose questions during their presentations. Judith Nadler was appointed library director and university librarian in 2004. Her appointment followed 38 years of distinguished service to the university. She is an alumna of the University of Jerusalem and holds degrees in comparative literature and library science from that university. Randy Picker is the James Parker Hall Distinguished Service Professor of Law at the law school here, where he teaches and does research in the areas of antitrust, intellectual property, technology, and the law and network industries. He is also a co-author of Game Theory and the Law. We are very pleased to have both of them here today. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Judith Nadler and Randall Picker.
Thank you, Roberta, and welcome everyone who is here on such a dreary, rainy day. We truly appreciate it. It is a privilege to talk to you about a topic that is close to my heart. And it is especially meaningful to talk to you here in this room, a room that is dedicated in honor of the leadership and contribution of the late Kathleen Czar, who was director of the science libraries some years ago. We will sorry, Professor Rand Picker and I will talk about different aspects of the topic of today's talk, and we will allow then ample time for dialogue with you. I will talk about libraries and users in the digital age. I'm in the spotlight too much, and that doesn't work very well. I will allow for questions during the talk. I will pause at points where I believe that questions would be more meaningful, and clearly there will be also time at the end of the talk. What I will cover is the expanding reach of the library to provide context for the talk. I will talk about what this means for libraries, what this means for librarians, and what this means for you. You meaning students, faculty, researchers, alumni. To put my talk into context in terms of what our users want, the library has a culture of assessment. We assess what we provide in terms of service and collections in order to use the input in then moving forward in our strategic planning process. And here I have some experts from faculty surveys. We do these sequentially and we rotate them starting from a survey to college undergraduates to graduates and faculty. So here's some excerpts. An excerpt from graduate student survey of 210. Keep print resources, exclamation mark. I find it much more convenient to be able to check out print books and cutting edge topics than to download an electronic copy. In 211, undergraduates tell us, more ebooks, please. Being able to read books online saves me overdue fees, travel time, and the money to buy a book for class. And most recently, this year's survey of faculty. In my experience, the organization, accessibility, and breadth of collections and services provided by the staff are outstanding. Don't do anything to compromise these things. Well, a hybrid environment, hybrid needs of users, different perspective, some competing, some conflicting, but all have to be met if we are to support and serve our constituencies. So I have created for my own use and for my use with my colleagues in the library, a graph that helps me explain to myself and others the context in which the library lives and move forward. So I thought I should briefly use this context for you as well. And you have it as a printout, on your seats. So you may want to follow, it there or follow it on the screen. You might want to think about this as the 5 fingers of the caring hand of the library. Or you may want to think of it as arrows that represent the 5 aspects of the mission of the library. Whichever way, let's follow the graph. In the middle, you have a blue arrow. The blue arrow represents the heart of the endeavor, collections or resources. Collections that today, as we know them, are physical and are owned. The library buys them and owns them. And gradually to these owned and physical collections, we are adding digital collections, collections that are locally created in digital form, collections that are digitized either locally or in collaboration with Google. We do a lot of that as well. And collections that we do not own, but link to. In other words, electronic resources that we don't buy, but we license. To the left, you have the discovery. Discovery is to find out what we actually own. Discovery that in a traditional library happens through catalogs. In a very distant past, card catalog, clearly now and since recent times, electronic catalogs. using a very controlled vocabulary, not very intuitive to those who really are not librarians. And that increasingly moves through a vocabulary that is more intuitive, that is more the kind that one uses when one searches on Amazon and on Google. And the discovery tools become more interoperable and have to be interoperable because there are so many resources that are not necessarily just located in the library's own holdings. Access, in other words, the way to get hold of these resources, again, is controlled and physical. Increasingly, it becomes open access, or the urge, the desire for open access, and with it, issues of rights management, of copyright, issues that we will hear more about in the second part of this presentation. As to services, services in the traditional library were were delivered in the library, in a physical environment, services, library, where we are. Increasingly, we add to this the virtual library and library where you are. In other words, you are able to search our catalogs, use our resources remotely. And that is an increasing situation. Preservation, originally, traditionally focused on physical and collection treatment and collection care, is increasingly focusing on digital archiving and digital curation, very complex issues, and issues, again, that we will talk a little bit further. In the middle, at the palm of your hand, is the responsibility for carrying out these services. We start from an older environment where libraries were self-sufficient, where libraries were in competition with each other. Moving forward, we are more and more cooperative and more in collaboration with others. And this collaboration is really what fuels, what enables the movement forward. So we can say that the movement from the top to the tip is really fueled by technology and enabled by what's in the palm of your hand, by the collaboration. So if you were to stop for a moment here, are there any questions so far? Yes?
There's one thing that's missing from here. I wonder what your concept of what's being referred to now as big data.
Right.
And,
The concept of big data.
And how you see the library interacting with this concept.
The library is increasingly in the position of having to interact with big data. The first...
What do you think that is? What do you know what that is?
Oh, yeah. The question is, what is the role of the library in relation to big data?
What is big data?
Big data is information that is an example. A researcher does work on a project that requires statistical data or biological data or
So I've been doing a project, I don't know if this is on or not, an antitrust project where I've been looking at how Google links to other sites. So if you've been following this, the European Union and the
Right.
Federal Trade Commission have both been looking at this. It's still pending in the EU. And the question is, does Google favor its own properties and as it were, downgrade other properties? So I spent a chunk of the summer doing web scraping, taught myself Python, and it's easy to pull together basically as much data as you want. I'm working with a data set of roughly 750,000 links, just like that. And that's nothing, right? If you talk to the astrophysicists, their numbers get that much bigger. That's the world of big data.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Randy. So it's a big world of big data. And because so much of what is being done on these research projects is funded by the government, funding agencies require that this big data be stored and archived somewhere and available to whoever needs to have it available. And that is where the role of the library comes in. The library is in the business of providing information for the future. That's what archiving was in the traditional way all along. And now the library is put in a position to have to think together with researchers, together with information technology units on campus, together with other areas that actually have that data to decide how that data can be served. And the library is actually working on an institutional repository that will support this need. It's very expensive and very complex, and many decisions as to what should be saved and for how long it should be saved, how that should be selected, and so on. Any other questions? No? Then we should move forward. Okay, then. So if this is so, then what does it mean for libraries? Well, I believe that physical and virtual libraries will coexist, and at least coexist for a foreseeable future. I am asking myself periodically, what do I mean by foreseeable future? And I always say, well, not more than 20 years ahead. One cannot foresee anything further, but this is a moving target. When we built the Mansueto library, which you have just seen, it was for 25 years into the foreseeable future. Now we have already gone into this foreseeable future, so the concept moves with us. But the digital and physical information will coexist. The environment will be built to support both the digital and the physical medium. Content, our collections, will continue to include materials that we own and materials that we do not own, which bring additional complexities that we will see in a moment. These are just pictures, from real-time pictures. Our stacks are heavily used by our students and faculty, and at the same time, our librarians help students with information that they bring in on handheld devices. So the mixed environment, just continues. What will it mean for library spaces? Physical spaces will continue to be important. However, they will change in the way they are used to and in the purposes they support. There will be the spaces and environments will be blending library collections and learning. There is much more of an expectation for beautiful spaces than ever before. Students come in with an expectation that the environments are beautiful. When I was a student, or even in my early days here as a librarian, the beauty of a space did not in any way impact or have anything to do with the content of a collection or the services I received. It is very different today. What is also different is the tension between, or the mix of expectations for quiet spaces and spaces where people talk and work collectively and interoperate with technology. The library has developed several such mixed spaces and will continue to do so. There is something that is enormously important, I believe, is the human interaction. And whatever we do in terms of spaces, the human interaction has to be retained as something that is continues to be very valuable, even for those who don't even realize how important that is. Beautiful, inspiring spaces for reading and working is sort of the mantra for us as we move forward with our spaces. What has happened here?
I see. Hang on. You hit the wrong button, I think. Let's see if we can fix it. Yeah.
It is amazing. In previous environments, hitting the wrong button wouldn't have changed the world as much as it does today. But that's, it's amazing what one can do at a touch of a button. So here are just some pictures that show an environment that very much is like the one that we knew from before, and yet different, first of all, because of our own institution's way of allowing students to interact with resources. This is a picture out of the Special Collections Research Center, a center that is located in the Regenstein Library that you went through when you went to Mansueto. And we allow interaction by students and faculty with rare books, which is not very common to other libraries. And actually, as you can see, we allow them not with gloves because, I have just learned that it is the ungloved hand that has potential to do less damage to paper than actually the gloved hand, because you have more sensitivity with your fingers, so then you can sense that you don't ruin it. And yet you see actually this room where you see students interacting with a librarian that displays information on a screen, and you see the students with handheld devices and books and notebooks. It's interesting how much notebooks I see when I walk through the library, how much handwriting I see. And here you see the Research Computing Center, a visualization laboratory, actually, that is built into this room that allows actually faculty to do visualization and interact with big data. And why in the library? Because it is so very important to provide for students and faculty and researchers, if at all possible, a one-stop shopping. They come into an environment and they find technology, they find traditional material, they find information that allows them to interact with data in ways in which they didn't interact before, and clearly not in a library. So it is into this environment that the Mansueto Library was built. And you have seen it, maybe not under such a blue sky as you see it here, but you've seen it. And this is the pathway that takes you into the Mansueto, and you see here the bubble from the outside. It was a difficult decision and a controversial decision and a lengthy one to whether to build, and if to build, a library for books in the age of Google, because that's exactly when the decision was made, when Google announced their participation, their membership with Google Partners to digitize the books of the world. And it was, the agreement was reached to do this because of the mixed environment, because materials are still very much in book form, because not everything exists in digital form, because not everything is equally well used in digital form, and because a hybrid environment will probably take us quite far into the foreseeable future. And here is the thing that you have seen actually in real life. But anyway, that is how it looks in a crosscut if you look from the bubble and down to the 50 feet under where you have seen the books today. And it has the capacity, as you know, for 3.5 million volumes in high density, safe preservation environments. And so I will not take the time to go through with you to the details unless you have questions at the end about Mansueto. And then you have the magnificent reading room that was built with an eye to providing a beautiful space for students. And it is almost impossible to get a seat in Mansueto. It's very popular, very beautiful. It is a place that gives you the sense that the sky is the limit. So, what does it mean for librarians? For librarians, it means a very complex environment. An environment in which both deep subject expertise and very good technical skills are important. You cannot be a good librarian today if you don't have both of these. libraries will select and manage information that they own and others that they do not own. And this provides quite many complex issues for librarians. They have to manage the information glut. There is no lack of information. There is too much of it. And there is a need to help users select, among that information. In the traditional library, librarians collected information, they selected that information and chose what they thought is of highest quality. If you go on the web, you don't have that. So that selectivity. So that is what they will have to help users with. And one example is the Hati Trust, which maybe at the end we'll have more opportunity to discuss, which is really a repository, a trusted repository of digitized content digitized by now 60 partners around this country and the world, working with Google, and additionally also local digitization to provide access to materials, full access to those that are in public domain, and selective access to those that are not. And we are a member of Hati and work with Google, and you all actually have access to Hati, and we'll, at the end we can talk about what Hati actually gives you. Much that we do now, different from the past, is not only collaborate with units on campus, but also invite them. We are hospitable to their being located in the library. And this is just one example where to the right, you see the reference desk in Regenstein, and to the left, you see the technology desk, similar to the Apple Store information desk, where users are helped with technology, are given advice what technology to use, and it is transparent to them who is a librarian and who is an information technologist in that context. So that kind of connection is very important. So this then is what it means for libraries and for librarians. Any questions so far? Yes?
I wonder if you see this as being applicable to local community libraries.
Whether local community libraries should do something similar, is that, okay, yeah. The answer is yes. Definitely yes. It's just local community libraries may not have necessarily the context of the university and the research needs. So parts are applicable. In other words, the spaces, whether they are more interoperable, more technology equipped, definitely yes. The information glut and the help to users, definitely yes. The difficulties for a librarian, in whichever library they are, the complexities are similar. What is different is actually the research environment and the needs of the faculty and the researcher who are part of our community in ways in which it wouldn't be for a community college. Yes?
Of the 60 partners,
Yeah?
how many of those partners are universities? Do you know?
Yes, the majority are. The majority are universities. There are also some other institutions, but the majority are universities, and the majority are in this country. And it started out with Google 5 institutions, and then the next wave, Chicago joined this as well. There are 10 million volumes now digitized in Hati. There are, this means like 5 million volumes probably, equivalent, and about 30% of these are in public domain. Okay then, so what does this mean for you? Well, it means a richer and more complex information environment, no question about that. It means a mix of validated and you, I mean not just you as alums, but the students, faculty, researchers. It means information that is not selected with the same kind of selectivity as were collections of libraries traditionally. There is the fact, the reality, that not everything exists in electronic form. And yet, it doesn't exist for a number of reasons. One, because it hasn't been published in electronic form. In part, in our library, 50% of our resources are in languages other than English and come from countries other than the United States, and from countries where digitization is not, as much known or much, practiced as here. It also has to do with rights management and the fact that not everything can be available in digital form unless it is born digitally meant to be so. There are rights management and publisher imposed limits. We'll talk about it. Professor Pickett clearly will know much more about this than I do. And there are shortcomings of currently available devices. They're not necessarily a full replica of the book that you hold. Some do not show the images. Some are less, comfortable to use. Clearly things that will change over time, but this is the situation today. There is the question of perpetuity of content. We know that some of the formats, of our own devices that we have, has become obsolete. So the obsolescence of formats is a big thing. In the early digitization and early production of digital forms, less attention was paid to documenting the technology used for producing the text in a certain format. And when it came to having to migrate this to a new platform, there was not enough information there to know where it comes from in order to know how to migrate it. That is much different now, and to now much more documentation there is, and that is what is called metadata, data about data. Put that data right away when you create something, so when it has to be migrated to a different platform, you have that information. So things change. But still there is there is a nostalgia about the print. There is a comfort level to using print forms, just because we are more used to them. So it is, some of it is subjective and some of it is not. Pardon? No, okay. So another problem here is that the print-based financial paradigm is evolving and will accommodate the electronic resources, but is not there yet. What does that mean? The library buys a book. The library can loan the book. There is interlibrary loan. We can borrow it from a different library. There are no problems in this sense, other than if we have enough copies. With electronic resources, this is not the same. If we buy a resource, or even if we link to a resource, the price is assigned based on the core group that is, more or less so many students, so many users. If you want to bring in an entire new core group, there's a different price to it. So there are not the financial models to allow borrowing, interlibrary loan, or access to multiple users is not yet in place the way it is for the print material. So that's an issue. However, we are adapting the situation, the services, and making resources available. And actually, I have good news for you, and I'm so glad that this can be announced today. If you turn my chart around, you will actually see what is available to you, starting actually, I would say almost this week. Access to this is something that is made possible by a collaboration between the Alumni Association and the library to bring to you the access to resources that the library not necessarily owns, but links to. But you can access them remotely as much as you could access them when you come to the library. And they are Project Muse, which Sage journals, the EBSCO Academic Search, EBSCO Business Search, Articles Plus, and other resources, some of whom you may have used already and some you have not. It is a wonderful thing that this has been achieved, and it is just, I suppose, the beginning of making it possible to extend the core group to those outside of campus, and to extend the resources to resources that are in electronic form. So I will stop here and let Professor Spicker pick up.
I'm happy to be here, and thanks for having me here. I wrote the bio, so I'm embarrassed to admit that I left out that I also have 3 degrees from the university. So I'm an alum just like you are. I went to the college and the econ department in the law school. So indeed, I studied for the bar exam in this building. It had just opened. And I'd studied in all the other libraries on campus. I'd been in Regenstein and Harper and the law school, obviously, but even libraries like Eckhart and SSA and Jones. I actually loved Jones. Do you remember Jones? Yes. Jones was the chemistry library. But I studied for the bar exam in this building, so and that worked out. So I'm always happy to be back here. So. The future of books and libraries in the digital age. So I'm going to talk about some of the developments really through a legal lens. I think that turns out to be surprisingly an important lens for where we are. And I want to start in some sense with the e-book and talk about that for a little bit. And then I'll talk about digital libraries. I think that's the natural progression here. And part of what's so interesting here and such a dramatic shift from where we were before is, and I've written a number of papers on all of this, which you can Google it and find it. But the idea that we're switching from paper books to mediated books, and that process of mediation, the fact that we're going to have devices in our hands between us and the books, the storytelling will still be books, the long-form essay will still be books, but the fact that it's mediated turns out to be an important change for opportunities, and that raises all sorts of issues that are really fascinating, and which shockingly books so much, not so much in the legal system, here and there a little bit, but the mediated books I think will be in a big way a lot. So you know what that mediation looks like, right? That's the Kindle. Lots of people have Kindles. We have multiple Kindles in my house. I read books on my iPad through the Kindle app. And you know what's obviously happened over time is that the devices have gotten better and they've gotten cheaper. And that creates all sorts of opportunities. So some of those opportunities I think are not obvious. So I have 3 kids, and my youngest is now in 7th grade, but I suspect was in 5th grade. And we downloaded Frankenstein and read it together on the Kindle. And what was obvious to me immediately in doing that, we've read lots of books on paper, lots of books on the Kindle, but what was distinctive about this book is that it's got a very hard vocabulary, and archaic vocabulary, but lots of hard words. And if you'd had to read that on paper, I think as we talk about it in the econ world, the transaction cost of that would have been too high. You would have been constantly putting down the book and having to go to the dictionary, and that's really tiresome, and maybe you don't do it. In contrast, on the Kindle, boy, you take a finger and you press exactly, and the definition pops up. And so if I'd said to Emma, we're going to sit down and we're going to do vocabulary words for the next hour, I don't know what kind of reaction I would have gotten. But if I said what we're going to do is we're going to read Frankenstein, and boy, we'll learn a lot of words really easily. Transformative. So I think there are ways in which these devices matter that maybe is not obvious. It was a great delight to read Frankenstein that way, and as I say, I don't think we would have done it on paper. All right, but I said there are changes. When you go to the bookstore, and we have wonderful bookstores in Hyde Park still, the Seminary Co-op bookstore has moved into a new location, but it's still central to how the campus operates. If you go in and pick up a book, you probably won't have to sign a contract to buy that book. Very few of them come that way. In contrast, the Kindle comes with the terms of use, an extended terms of use. And if you haven't read the Kindle terms of use, well, this is your lucky day, because we're going to do it together. So we're going to spend some time with it. That's what lawyers like to do. It's really healthy to read contracts. Well, we're going to do that. So it goes on and on, actually. But we'll start here. Changes to service. We may modify, suspend, or discontinue the service in whole or in part at any time. Well, that's rather ominous, right? I mean, I'm buying this device, I'm putting these books on it, and Amazon is telling me that they can get rid of it at any point in time? All right, I'm not sure what that means, but we'll have to figure that out. Then they go on. You've got rights, but we can automatically terminate them if we want to. And if we don't like what you're doing, we're going to revoke your access. So these books that you've purchased, that you've read, all of a sudden they could vanish in an instant, at least in theory. I say in theory. And then it turns out here's what happens in reality. So as you may know, the setup of Amazon is they've obviously got an inventory management problem. They have to figure out what books they can sell. And they allow people to effectively upload books to sell. You could be an author, an ebook author, and do that. Someone uploaded a copy of George Orwell's 1984, and it turned out that the uploaded copy, the person doing the uploading didn't have the copyright to it. That's obviously the Orwell estate presumably holds the copyright to 1984. Once Amazon discovered that this book had gone through its system and that some people had downloaded it, Amazon had a fix for it. It reached out and erased it. And the notion that Amazon was reaching out to erase 1984, well, there couldn't be a better story than that. I mean, you wouldn't make that up. You would feel that was being too aggressive to do that, but that was exactly what they did. Now, that's got a couple of sides to it. The copyright lawyer in me, and I teach copyright at the law school, sort of says, wow, that's great. We have lots of copyright infringement that takes place. Weak enforcement tools. This is great. Finally, a meaningful enforcement tool. On the other hand, right? The other hand is that the contract which talks about changes of service and termination, which you look at it and your eyes sort of roll over it, that seems so who cares? At the end of the day, actually, it's a very different relationship with these books than you have with the physical books that you have in your house. And part of understanding the regime we're creating here has to understand what the rights are of the platform owners in changing the terms of that platform over time and in changing your use and the ability to use that platform over time. And the 1984 example really brought that home in a big way. All right, we'll read some more. So you're interacting with your Kindle, and as you know, you can highlight things on it. That's one of the nice things to be able to do, and on the iPad it shows up in color. The new version of the iPad Kindle app gives you multiple choices of color. You're phoning home to the mothership when you do that. Amazon knows what you are doing, basically as you're moving your finger across the screen. Amazon is recording that. So there's lots of information that is going back to Amazon as you're interacting with the device, right? I thought the device was a vocabulary machine. That's between my daughter and me. But between you and Amazon, it's basically you saying, here, Amazon, this is what I find interesting right now, okay? Well, again, right, when you're dealing with a physical book and making notations on the side, boy, was that dumb, right? You're not telling that to anybody other than yourself. But now Amazon can see all of that. Not only can Amazon see all of that, but God only knows where that information is. So the terms of service, the Kindle terms of service is very clear that they may be storing this in who knows where, outside the country, right? So your act of highlighting something on your Kindle may be creating an information record which exists for you in Ireland. Ireland seems to be a popular choice for many of these data servers. Facebook's got a data server in Norway because if you're running a big data center, you want it to be cold. They're electricity and heat intensive. And that means that the laws which apply to that, again, you're just sitting here reading the book. The laws that apply to that may be the laws of any number of different countries, right? That's the world in which we're embracing. And the ability of the authorities to get access to that information, again, may be the laws of many different countries. Not only do we have all those issues, but there's also a privacy notice. So Amazon wants to tell you what they might be doing with that information. And there's a variety of privacy regulations at both the federal and state level which may require Amazon to do that. That's obviously a clickable link. We can click and go. But before we get there, I'm going to give you a tour of what's on my Kindle. So if you haven't been, you can go to kindle.amazon.com. And you can see all of your highlights in your Kindle books. So when I started reading on the Kindle, I wanted to read something which wasn't a real book, because I didn't want to invest in the platform and read real things if I didn't like it. So the first book I read on it was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, which, you know, everyone read at some point. And a book where, if you've read it, there's a lot of stuff going on. What the Kindle chooses to highlight that I found interesting, I feel comforted by this, is the idea that they put the journalist in jail for 90 days for libel. That was interesting to me. I didn't know you could do that under Swedish law. But you can look at your highlights. So I've been reading Thinking Fast and Slow by Danny Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner, not one of our Nobel Prize winners in economics. How he got away is hard to imagine. And it's a terrific book on sort of cognitive science and economics. But what you can see there is what you've highlighted. And indeed, you can grab that in a screen capture and download that and simply mark that up as your notes on the book. So you can see the opportunities that are available. They're really quite dramatic. At the same time, and now we're going to get back to the privacy notice in just a second, Amazon aggregates this. Amazon says, well, what does Randy find interesting? What does Judy find interesting, right? Grabs all those together and indeed says, look, here are the things that people are paying attention to. Here are the passages in these books which are the most highlighted ones. The Hunger Games, and I guess, and I haven't read those, and Catching Fire, which I think is one of as well. It says it's a sequel to The Hunger Games. But these, if you want to know what America is thinking about, and it could be the world is thinking about, these highlights in the books are constantly providing a stream of information to Amazon. Indeed, as you may have seen in the New York Times this week, there was a story on the front page that there's a technology out there. It's not an Amazon technology, but a similar technology, where basically you've got professors who are putting content into e-readers. They can tell if you've read it or not. They can tell how much time you spent with it, whether you've marked it up, whether you've made notes, right? Whether you sort of randomly closed your eyes and highlighted. They can't tell that yet, right? And so, you know, getting a sense of how your students are interacting with your material, well, that's pretty exciting and maybe also frightening. You see the Big Brother reference. That was in the New York Times in the last week. Well, the privacy notice. Maybe we should look to see what Amazon wants to do with all of this information. The privacy notice goes on for some time. I just grabbed a few highlights. So one of the things that drives the internet is advertising. Google is financed by advertising. 99% of Google's revenues are from advertising. Facebook is financed by advertising. Advertising is the lifeblood of the internet. And what the holy grail of people doing advertising is targeted advertising. They want to know what you're interested in, right? And how what I'm interested in is different from what Judy's interested in. And so what Amazon is able to do is to able to take this giant machine it has for gathering information about you, and you should think of the Kindle in exactly those terms. Right? Your reading of books in exactly those terms for Amazon. They're able to grab that information and then say, okay, when you come to the website, when you go to the Amazon website, what advertising should we be showing you? What things? And they do a certain amount of advertising. It's maybe not quite as visible as it is on Google. But what advertising should we be showing you? All with an idea towards making that advertising as effective as possible. I want to be clear, I don't think that's a bad thing, but there are certainly people who are very concerned about privacy issues. And you know, I have a colleague who teaches a whole course on these issues. And it's this ability to gather information in a way that we couldn't before, from an activity that you couldn't before. When books were not mediated, when we simply had books on paper, your act of reading a book didn't bring with it the opportunity for this third party to gather all this information about you. That's the world we live in now. And Amazon lays all that out. Moreover, and I wrote a paper about this a few years ago and then found their patent on this, we're likely to see situations where Amazon's actually going to insert advertising in books. And use that as a way of financing the books. I think that's actually exciting. It expands the range of books. And the reality is that when you're dealing with printed books, it's hard to have advertisements which are timely, and you can't advertise this week's specials at Treasure Island. The co-op is gone. The Hyde Park Produce Co-op is gone. It's been replaced by Treasure Island. Couldn't have advertisements for that in a book that might last on the shelves for 5 years. In contrast, in digital books, or each time you open the digital book on your Kindle, it can phone home and get the current ads. You could easily have books financed by advertising. And lo and behold, once I wrote that paper and went looking, I found this patent application that Amazon has, which is exactly about this idea. It's exactly the natural thing to do in these circumstances. So again, the fact that we've moved from paper to mediation, right, has many consequences associated with that. Some of those go to the information environment it creates. Some of those go to the financing opportunities. As you may have seen in the last 2 weeks, Amazon has acquired Goodreads, which was a social reader site, and that's part of this as well. The fact that you're doing this in a mediated fashion means that it's much easier for reading to be done in sort of a social, communal way, right? Virtual book groups and the like. And that's really exciting as well on the technology. If you've got really idiosyncratic reading tastes, right? The technology makes it easy for you to find the 6 people in the country who want to read the same things you do at the same time. Again, that's exciting, but that's valuable information. And Amazon has just spent, I think it's another $150 million to buy Goodreads to grab more of that information because of the richness of the information that these kinds of systems provide. Okay, I want to switch to digital library. So now the question is, as we go from the digital book to the digital library, how does that change things? And that turns out to be really interesting. So we start with Google. Judy obviously talked about Google. And Google is a modest company. It wants to organize the world's information. That's all. Yeah, good to know. Modest ambition. So that's what they want to do. And I applaud that. And Google's a great company. And that's what they set out to do when they announced in 2004 this Google Print service, as they were calling it, which eventually became Google Book Search. And Judy gave you some sense of that, the history behind that, the partnerships with the libraries. She can talk about that in much greater detail than I can. But let's talk about what that means for us now and what issues does that present for libraries. So we'll go to Google Books, books.google.com. We'll run a search. I ran a search on Thinking Fast and Slow. You immediately see that obviously one of the things that changes here is that these books are content for Google in just the way that the books are content for Amazon. And Google can match ads with that, and they do exactly that, and a chance to take your interests and monetize those. Now, as we focus on digital libraries, and I'm really talking about books, we want to focus on 3 different situations, really. We want to focus on books that are in copyright. Thinking Fast and Slow is a good example of that. We want to focus on so-called orphan works, and I'll tell you what those are in a little bit. And then we want to focus on the books in the public domain, because even that turns out to be interesting. Judy mentioned that 30% of Hathi's books, I guess, are in the public domain. So this is Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a relatively recent book. It's in copyright. And Google basically has done deals with publishers to try to make it possible for you to buy these books from them. So in some sense, they instantly open a bookstore that's available throughout the world. Obviously, they also want to sort of tease you in, and the way they do that is they put up some of the content, but then they cut out lots of things. Obviously, they don't want you to substitute out of the book to buying the book to simply looking at it online. So it's kind of a browsing, right? That's what we do in libraries. We browse, and that's one of the things that Google makes possible through Google Book Search. All right. But the other issue is this. the big publishers are very nervous about what this world of digital libraries means with regard to their ability to sell works. And so when you focus on the kinds of works that will go into digital libraries, you have to recognize that some publishers may be reluctant to put their new in-copyright content into those libraries. They don't want, they're concerned about friction-free sharing, right? At one point, one of the publishers said, you know, our experience is that a physical book you can lend 28 times before it starts to fall apart. We think the digital book should fall apart in 28 times. Oh yes, we recognize that's not real, but artificially we'll say after you've lent it 28 times, you have to buy a new copy, right? They have a financing model that's based upon a physical relationship that they're trying to preserve. So as we move into these digital libraries, figuring out how we get all of the content that has historically been in physical libraries into the digital libraries, that's going to be tricky. And it's going to be tricky with regard to in-copyright content, but it's also going to be, I think, surprisingly tricky with regard to public domain content. And so maybe you should get a sense of what that world looks like a little bit. So I ran a search. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Again, Google's running ads next to that, the Rolex Awards. I don't know why that would show up. That's really interesting. I don't even know what that is, but it sounds high-end. But in any event, the top choice we get here is the Lewis Carroll book from 1869. Now, that sounds pretty promising for me. As a copyright person, I know that the public domain in the United States is basically anything before 1923. So I should be pretty confident that this 1869 book is a public domain book that I should have, you know, broad access to, free access to, universal access to. And indeed, if you click on the link, Google gives you a chance to download it for free in any number of formats. And so I chose the PDF format, went to download it, and I guess I get it. Oh, no, I don't. Google has embraced a number of restrictions on the books that they host. They've made a huge investment on the order of maybe $300 million in the public domain works. Think of that as Pirates of the Caribbean type money, maybe $100 a copy, do the math. And they don't want their competitors to grab the entire database. So they've implemented a series of technological controls, technical protection measures, as we talk about them in the copyright world, to control that. To download this book, I have to prove I'm not a robot. Most days I can do that. So it worked out. I dutifully typed in Sesha, whatever that is. That's a CAPTCHA, right? Something that robots are supposed to struggle with. And typed it in, and lo and behold, I downloaded the book. Got it. Good, system works. And then you start to read the book. And the first page of the book is sort of a letter from Google to you. And the letter says, you know, this book, we got it from libraries. It was preserved. That's what libraries do. That's what Google's here to help you do. Discovery, we're going to put it online. That's all great. Google has embraced the values of the great libraries of the world. They also talk about the public domain and how important it is, and the way in which it ties us to the past. And one of the great things about libraries is the sense of continuity with the past. That's good. And they say, we've entered into the kinds of deals with libraries that Judy described. And so they get a sense of that. And then all of a sudden it changes. They say, nevertheless, notwithstanding all those good things, nevertheless, we have rules. And here are our rules. So it was expensive to do this, and we need to make sure that the investment we've made into this is preserved. And so we can't have automated querying. We can't have commercial parties grabbing the entire set of materials we've created. And then they impose a series of restrictions. You think you can turn Alice in Wonderland into a big movie? Someone did that. Not through this version. You don't want to do that. Google says you can only make non-commercial uses. No automated querying. And Google wants a credit for what they've done. So even though this book is in the public domain, Google has wrapped it with technological protection measures and a kind of contract. I don't know if it's a contract or not. We haven't litigated that. But a kind of contract on what you're allowed to do with it, even though the work's in the public domain. So I think we're going to struggle with regard to books in copyright to get those into digital libraries. Publishers are nervous. With regard to the public domain, and I have a longer talk about that, It's on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, doesn't everyone? You can go watch that there. That's the life of the modern academic. We do YouTube. Then there's the third piece of it, and the third piece of it is the orphan works situation. The orphan works idea is this. Someone writes a book, it's an old book, and the person dies. And copyright, duration of copyright is life of the author plus 70 years, right? First day of class in copyright, I take out a blank piece of paper, I compose a poem. It's always a very bad poem. What have I done? I've created something, but I get to control for my life plus 70 years. I've done that in about 3 minutes. It's really quite remarkable. Original work of authorship fixed in a tangible expression. Boom, that's what I get. The problem with that is, though, is that it means that you have to figure out who holds the copyright. And there are huge numbers of works, so-called orphan works, for which we can't do that. We'd like to bring them into this digital library. We'd like to ask if it's okay for us to do that. Can't figure out who that is. And so the orphan works issue is a United States issue. It's an European Union issue. They've been moving forward on it with some legislation they've done. I've testified in Congress on this issue. Congress understands that they should do something about it. Legislation has got through various stages, but has never been passed. Google tried through a bold effort to settle, to put the orphan works online and then settle that case, and got sued. The Authors Guild, someone mentioned beforehand the Scott Turow piece in the New York Times this week. He is president of the Authors Guild. The Authors Guild sued Google. And copyright damages, boy, it can be like $150,000. Statutory damages, $150,000 per use, per work. The numbers get big even by Google standards. So that suit was brought. Google came up with a pretty clever settlement on that. And the judge said, it's too clever. And so, yeah, I saw. Hang on. And so that settlement has died, and that case is now in litigation. Please.
Yeah, I was just wondering who got the money.
What money?
Any fine? You said that there was $150,000.
That would be damages, right? And so exactly. So the damages would go to the harmed authors. If you infringe my work, I want money from you. Don't do it.
But who is the author? If you can't discover it, who gets the money?
Good. So you've got two different types of works here. You've got some works which were in copyright. Obviously, those would be the authors. Yes, good, exactly. So it was thought that and the Authors Guild had an elaborate scheme for this, but it was thought that maybe having a pot of money there, all of a sudden the authors might show up, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly. There's a second lawsuit like this. So Judy mentioned the Hathi Trust. Hathi Trust started to roll out a version of this involving the orphan works and promptly got sued as well. And so the ability to bring into these libraries these works, which are on the whole pretty obscure works, that's being limited by the inability to track duration, who owns the copyright over a very long period of time. So where do we go? I'm almost done. Maybe Hathi, though even Hathi's going to have its issues. There's an effort to roll out a digital library, the Digital Public Library of America. That's starting to roll out. And maybe that's the path we'll go down. But this new mediation of books has huge implications for us as readers of books. That was the first part of the talk. Has huge implications for the kinds of libraries we can create. That's the kind of thing that Judy has to manage. Maybe the legal system will help with that, I'm not sure. But that's where we stand. So thank you.
Well, I'm interested in these orphan books. I own a collection of books which are largely late 19th century and very early 20th century. I write newsletters to certain people, and these books are not in libraries. So I write it, I footnote it, and I Xerox the pages that I'm citing, and I distribute it to a mailing list that's about 15 people. So I'm wondering, is Google going to sue me for this? I own the books. I paid money for them.
Yeah. So We'll start with the usual disclaimers. Yes, I'm a lawyer, but no, I'm not providing legal advice. So, I get emails from colleagues who say, if this were legal advice, it would be followed by a bill. So, but nonetheless, so let me tell you what I think. So on U.S. works that are, as you started with, in the late 1800s, those books should be in the public domain. So you shouldn't have any issues with regard to those books at all. You're free to do whatever you want with those books. And you're good with that with basically up to 1923. So anything 1922 and before, copy away, don't worry about it. After that, though, so let's be clear, after that, the fact that you own a physical copy of the work does not give you, the full set of rights to do anything you want with that. So if you own a book that's from 1925, you don't have the right to turn that book into a movie or a play. You have a right to, I'll be careful about how much copyright law I'll do. I can do a lot of copyright law, but you can transfer your copy of the book. The question is whether you can make those copies. That's going to be a fair use question. The answer is probably, right? Is Google going to sue you? No, it's not Google. It would be the copyright holder who would sue you. If you start doing this and you start making a lot of money off of it, you should expect that someone's going to come knocking on your door.
I lose money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they're going to bring you a microphone.
Who was it?
Right there.
There you are, sir.
Thank you. I've seen documents that were written by people I know, short stories, for example, and at the end of the page 1, they say, this is copyright by so-and-so.
Yes.
Now, does that mean that this person actually went to a legal office or went to the government, or whoever gives out copyrights, and actually did, or can it just say that?
So the answer to that is that has changed over the history of copyright, but in terms of what current U.S. law is. Current U.S. law says, this is what I do again, it's sort of remarkable. First day of copyright class. When I compose that poem without doing anything else, I have a copyright in that work. Copyright subsists, says the statute, just arises instantly in original works of authorship. In my poem, I've always just made it up, so it's original. Fixed, it has to be in a tangible medium of expression, and paper will qualify. And that's true whether I register or don't register. If I want to sue someone for a copyright violation, then I need to register it, right? And if I want to sue someone for the statutory damages we were talking about before, then it's helpful to have that copyright notice at the bottom. But nothing requires you to go register. That's what's thought of as a copyright formality, and pursuant to the Berne Convention, you're not supposed to have those as a country.
Would it be interesting for you to say something about the litigation that actually was at least postponed, the transformative use? Because
Sure.
That's actually a very interesting aspect of this as well.
Yeah, sure. So the litigation, I thought the litigation was remarkably clever, because what happened is Google sets up this, they get sued, and they try to settle the matter as what's called a non-opt-out class action. That sounds like gobbledygook, but you've probably been in those. And the idea is that, or an opt-out, if you want to think about it as an opt-out class action. The idea is that the judge says, we're going to form a group of people, and there's so many people that we can't really have all of them actually be participants in the lawsuit. So we'll call that a class. We'll just define it by some terms. People we can't find who owns the copyright for these books. And then we'll say to them, you are bound by this settlement unless you say you don't want to be. You have to affirmatively opt out. So you probably get notices like that in the mail where someone says, oh, we're going to kick you $2, and you can opt out if you want to or not. What was, genius or evil genius, I can't tell, was that the idea is that you would solve the orphan books problem because the orphan guys couldn't opt out. They didn't know that they had the rights. And so the hope was, if you're Google, is that you would bind all those people and you would legitimate the use of these works. And that was what Judge Chin, who was the district court judge at the time, said, you just can't do that. So that's the attempt to settle. Once that case wasn't settled, then this lawsuit is ongoing. Judy talks about transformation. So the fair use argument, U.S. copyright law has this doctrine of fair use, which says, well, under some uses, and this is what we were talking about before with your poetry group or whatever your group was, there's some uses which you don't have to get the permission of the copyright holder to do it. And we've got a variety of doctrines. The statute itself, it's in Section 107 of the statute. It's got this 4-factor test. It's not very clear. It's pretty messy. Google says, oh, we are transforming how these books are being used. No one's going to read these books online. We're just going to show snippets of them. But what we're making possible through the digitizing of these books is indexing and finding, discovery. This is the word the librarians use, that wouldn't otherwise be possible. That's a change in use, and you should take that into account as a fair use. I think that's a pretty good argument, but it's in active litigation right now. Please. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I have the mic. Here's the thing. I had no idea that when I was reading a Kindle book that they were collecting all this information. So that's quite interesting.
You may be able to turn it off. I don't know.
Well, I wonder about that, if it's possible to turn it off. And if anything I write has my copyright, how can they use it willy-nilly? The
license. The terms of use is going to have a license, which is going to let them do that. So they're not going to sell the notes of Roberta as a book. So I think you need not fear that. Absolutely. So and any time you sign up for one of these services, and you've run into these things. So I've never used Instagram. I'm too old to use Instagram. Maybe you guys have used Instagram. But Instagram is this photo sharing site that is very hot with young folks like my daughter. Facebook bought it for $1 billion. Instagram at some point was going to change their terms of use where they were going to start selling your pictures. And the world went nuts and they backed away from that. But typically these things have all sorts of licenses where your use of the service is giving them a non-exclusive license to do a variety of things with the information you're giving them.
The other thing I would just comment on is that there was a period of time not that long ago when people were up in arms because the government was going to libraries to find out what they were reading.
Yep.
And now all the government has to do is ask Google.
Well,
understood.
Do you agree?
Mr. Nathanson, they've discovered I knew his cousin 50 years ago.
Judy, could you say what's the biggest problem that you face as the person running the library?
The biggest problem I face as a person leading the library is to envision the future and to know what decision to make that make me manage a good library today, but also prepare me for a good library tomorrow. You have seen in the survey, there was this plea, it's a wonderful library, it's a wonderful world, don't change it. What does that actually mean? How do I ensure that a faculty 15 years from now assesses the library in the same way? And how do I do that at times when budgets are very tight? And for everything that I want to embark on, I have to disembark from, right now. Those are the tough decisions.
I wrote a paper a couple years ago on a history of razors and blades, which I thought turned out to be really fascinating. And I think the history, if you think you know about history and know the technology, you don't. It's actually much more interesting. But the point of that is the key resource for me to write that paper were books in this library, which were old copies of the Sears catalog. And I was able to pull together a data set of prices from those. Well, now those, God only knows why you guys had those. I mean, and boy, if you were sitting there saying, could we de-access those? Could we get rid of those? I could have easily seen how you might have gotten rid of those. And those were an absolute treasure trove for me.
right? And that's in some ways, I think of Google, and especially the snippets, in other words, those citations, short citations for materials that are not yet in public domain. I see that a discovery tool, just like the browsing.
Yes.
But then in your case, those catalogs were actually also an access tool.
Right.
So, so therefore it's very difficult because it's hybrid and it's mixed, and it's very difficult to say what can you really give up without changing the fabric of this.
Yeah, I heard that there was a movement to try and change copyright laws to make it easier for, in this electronic age, to get access to stuff that was not accessible before. Do you know anything about this or what the status of it might be?
Well, I don't know what to say. So we had a copyright statute that was passed in 1909, and a lot of stuff happened. And we rapidly moved to change that in 1976. So the time lag of legislation, right? There was no question that people in 1930 thought we needed to completely revamp the copyright statute, and it really wasn't until 40 years later that we did. So you're absolutely right to say the current Registrar of Copyright gave a speech that was received a lot of attention in the last month. Maria Palenti, I think is her name, saying basically it's time to revisit copyright. That we last recodified the entire statute in '76. The Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is very prominent, was 1998. There's obviously been lots of copyright legislation, but there hasn't been a thorough rethinking. And so I think people are talking about that. But here's something like the orphan works legislation, where there are differences of views as to what we should do, but everyone understands the problem. And Google came up with this clever approach, which I understood why Judge Chin said, no, you can't do that. Everyone understands that the ball is in Congress's court to deal with that, and it's very hard to get things through. So the answer is, yes, people are thinking in exactly those terms. If we saw a major reformation of copyright in under 10 years, I'd be amazed.
I've heard Judy say that reading a book to a child is a magical experience that is not going to be replaced by e-books or Kindles or iPads anytime soon. Is that still your view? And how do the two of you actually use books and e-books in your own life? We've heard a little bit from Randy about that.
Well, a colleague of ours, of Randy's and mine, recently said something about digital immigrants and digital natives. Well, clearly, I'm not a digital native. I'm a digital immigrant, and even at times consider myself a digital illegal immigrant because I truly don't fully belong into this. I have, however, children, and I have grandchildren, and the grandchildren clearly are digital natives. When they were little, I did not read Kindle or iPads with them. It were books, and I wanted to make sure that this is so, because if you grow up with a Kindle, you'll never touch a book. I actually believe that this is so, unless a parent or a family tries to make sure that they also get exposed. And it's very important because for a very, very long time to come, not everything will be available in digital form, and to assume that you can circumvent everything that is in print is really a wrong thing. As to the experience, my grandchildren tell me that if they want information, they go to the screen. If they want to read for their pleasure, they go to a book. That's interesting. And I don't know whether this is the same for your experience, with a younger generation. Personally, I have fully embraced an iPad, a Nook, and prefer it by far over a print book if it is leisure reading. I think it's more comfortable. I can enlarge the print. I don't have to bother my husband with a night light and can read this, and he doesn't see the light bothering him. I can buy whatever I see, I buy and want to read right now. I don't have to go over even to to Barnes & Noble or whoever buy it. When I want to do my work, when I want to write a paper, I cannot do this by just going to a screen. I have to amass a range of things on the table. I want editions, I want dictionaries, I want, whatever, translations, other tools. And this is probably generational. I believe that it is not just because not everything that I need is online, but because I probably don't handle so well multiple things on a screen, or maybe because, and I believe that's one of the reasons, I don't believe that the handheld devices or the gadgets or the whatever are really yet to the point where they would make this very, very easy and comfortable, and I think that this is to come. So do I believe that this is the future? Actually, I very much believe that the digital future is a solid future. And in defense of Google, I would want to say that without Google, even our library would not have been able to do what we did.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you my sense of it. Oh.
Eat the mic.
Do what?
Eat the mic.
Oh, okay.
Closer to your mouth. Eat the
Closer? Okay.
You're fine.
Anyway, I hear an argument, at least I hear an argument for myself, is that for a backup, one should somehow, whether it's 25 years in the future or beyond, you shouldn't get rid of those books, even if you have to put them in a different library or warehouse them as if they were valuable economic documents for businesses. If you have another 9/11 or whatever. And also the digital technology that we have now. I mean, I just started, probably 1992 I bought a computer, but how do you access it if you don't have a device to look at that'll read your backup copies? I mean, this is kind of a primitive sort of look at it, but I would make an argument that you should keep the books someplace, because even with computers, it's nice to have a backup that's in paper. So I don't have less, I still have more.
It is not at all a primitive argument. It's actually a very real argument and a solid argument. And it's an argument, in part, is the argument on which the decision to build the Mansueto Library was made. There is always, and the Mansueto Library will run out of space as well, because that is also for a foreseeable future. However, libraries work together consortially to ensure copies of last resort. So there is never a full reliance of, just on digital forms. However, as we think of the past, that can be retained and captured and salvaged, and for the future in print form, there is enormously much now being published in digital form only. So that is really the issue here, and how can we assure that going forward, that information will be just as sturdy as is the one that we have in the past.
Right. So the archiving and collecting, I think, is a very different undertaking.
Right.
And you mentioned the obsolescence issue in your slides. And
the obsolescence is yet another thing, but the archiving is, how is this done? Well, it's done by mirror imaging. In other words, you don't have, like HathiTrust, for example, has 3 sites. So if something goes wrong in one site, it's not wrong in the other necessarily. Refreshing is one other way to preserve and understand that the more you use it, the more it stays alive. It sort of works like a muscle, I would say. If I don't use my arm, it will be stiff. In that sense, and yet there are those, legitimately, rightly so, are not all that comfortable with the permanence of digital forms, and that will change too. Yeah.
Are we vulnerable, let's say, if there's another big war, and some people think sooner or later there will be, the thoughts are that you set off a few atomic bombs high in the air and you destroy massive amounts of electronic information and functioning. Are we in danger of that sort of thing?
That must be your issue, not mine.
It will be all our issues, not just mine or yours.
I saw The Matrix. I saw how that works. So, well, I don't know. So I actually teach a class called Network Industries, and we did a day on cybersecurity. And so I guess I'm more concerned about the cyber invasion rather than the kinetic type thing you are. So I get the EMP, as they're called, issue, but yeah, exactly, which is what the atomic bomb would do. As you're paying attention to what's going on with regard to hacking and cyber warfare and the like, that strikes me as, and people distinguish between, as I said, kinetic, which is force, versus the other. And I think the cyber piece of it's a bigger issue right now, and one where we've got all of these machines which are, the problem is when you put your computer on the internet, you're creating an environment when a hacker can take advantage of what you've done if you haven't secured that machine properly. And so we've created this infrastructure which isn't as secure as one might like, and I think we're just starting to confront how we manage that. There's controversial legislation on cybersecurity, which is working its way through the House right now, and people on the civil liberties side are opposed to that. And so I think that's going to be a huge issue over the next 5 years. And I think we're only beginning to confront that. The EU has a new cybersecurity directive, so I think it's an incredibly hot issue, but not one where there's any meaningful resolution right now.
I'm taking the last one. You mentioned Scott Turow's article, which is titled, by the way, "The Slow Death of the American Author," and it talks about the erosion of copyright and what that's going to do to authors. And at the end, he points out that Russia, with all its digital piracy and so on, has no more copyright and no more authors. So what's going to happen with all of that?
Well, it's interesting. Do you want to talk about that?
What will happen with the
Scott Turow piece?
Yeah, the Scott Turow. Well, the Scott Turow piece says many things. One of them, it says, it's all about the disrespect towards copyright. The not compliance with copyright, and actually accuses libraries along with Google and all pirates, who take that.
I think he accuses you of lending books.
Yes. It is, I would consider this a very emotional statement from an author whom I love, and I can't wait.
Who's profited very well from the copyright system.
Right, and I have bought every book, and I'll buy it, however, read it online now and buy it. What is it, Intruder or whatever is the book that is supposed to come out, and I can't wait for it. But I believe it's emotional. I believe it is unwarranted, and exaggerate.
I thought there were pieces of it that were fine. It was interesting. So he was reacting to this recent decision that came out of the Supreme Court on importation of books, where the publishers are selling at one price in the United States, and in this particular case at a much lower price in Thailand. And a Thai student said, I could have my friends and family send those books back to the United States and I could resell them. There's a really deliciously complex set of statutes which apply to that, and the Supreme Court said he can do that. And I think that was yet another, I don't know which straw breaks the camel's back, but you saw the litany of things that he's concerned about at the same time, and there's a lot of people responding to this on the internet, so you can run those searches and find and see them. I saw something in my Twitter stream today. The world that we've emerged, lots of authors who would never have gotten through publishers have found an enormous following, and that's great for the readers. Boy, it's been remunerative for the authors. So I think it's much more mixed and complex than the Turow piece would suggest.
I would just want to say one word in defense of Scott Turow, not that he needs my defense, and that is there is an enormous sense of entitlement in every way. If it's there, it's open, it's mine, I can have access to, I don't have to ask, I can walk in, I share, that is exaggerated as well. So clearly emotional reactions are to these kinds of exaggerations. We live in a society and world of entitlements, and those are the tensions.
And thank you all for coming.